So, Hans, Nina, Teun, and Lotte, may I ask you to come forward? And if you have any questions, raise your hand, and if you ask a question, please say to which person you direct the question. In the meantime, I'd like to ask my question first. Teun, as the expert on terrorism, is the mass interception of data an effective way of countering terrorism?
Is this thing on?
I hope it is on. Yes, it is on.
We kind of look like some a cappella singing group, don't we?
Sorry?
We kind of look like some a cappella singing groups sitting here at the microphone.
Yes.
But, well, like I try to sort of briefly explain in my talk, I guess it kind of depends on how you use it. The idea that you can use it to find a needle in a haystack has I think been discredited in many reports. So if you want to find new suspects and you want to use all this bulk data, you're not going to get very far. Like traditional intelligence methods, like tip-offs from the public, to name an example, have been much more, have played a much more substantial role in discovering new plots than all that mass surveillance.
Well, just to get an idea, have you any idea? Because there are a lot of, they always say there are a lot of terrorist attacks being prevented. We have no reason to say that's not true. Are they prevented by mass surveillance, or are they usually prevented by something else?
From what we know, there's a couple of very effective ways to discover terrorist plots. One of them is like I said, tips from the audience. I mean, you'd be surprised how much leakage, as they call it, terrorists actually display. So. Even the most sophisticated planner will give us some signs that can be picked up on by people around him that he's planning a terrorist attack. And that's also why the relationship of the police intelligence service with the local population is so important. Because then they will come to you and give you that information. And it can be anything. It can be just to give you an example, one of the London bombers was seen with his hair all bleached, and that of course was the result of the peroxide that had been using to build that bomb. Another example is a guy who suddenly came to the mosque and had all these burns on his hands and feet, and then the imam of the mosque went to the police and said, "Okay, I'm not trusting this." Another example, I mean, I could do this for hours. But
yeah, okay. But those are other ways of preventing.
Right. I'm sorry, just to get back to your question. From what we know, these kinds of intelligence gathering have played a much bigger role in foiling terrorist plots than that digital mass surveillance. But again, we just have to go by what we know. Sometimes there are very useful journalistic accounts that you can get that information from. In other cases, the secret services throw us a few crumbs. So I'm talking about. I'm talking on basis of and I'll admit that, a sort of fairly limited set of information.
Yeah, Nina, you're from Amnesty International. Is this law in the Netherlands unique, or are other European countries have the same laws?
Well, what is unique about the Dutch law is that it governs the rules for the two intelligence secret services we have. That's different in other countries. There are more laws and more services. So, I don't know, to some extent it makes it less complex and more complex at the same time.
Okay.
But there are similar powers arranged in other laws in other countries as well.
Yeah, and Lotte, are there examples of countries where a law like this has been prevented by the public or taken down by the public? Do you know of any effective action?
Yeah, well, as I just mentioned, you had the case in the UK from Liberty, and it's not really clear yet what this means, but right now the law law which is comparable with the dragnet law is based on, this has been reigned unlawfully, so it might have a big effect on kind of their dragnet law.
Okay.
So yeah, possible. Yeah.
There. Hans, the toughest question for you. If the law would be 100% effective, would you still be against it?
Yes, but it's a completely ridiculous
Question. That's my
hypothetical
specialization.
hypothetical question that really makes no sense.
Okay.
I mean, if you would be, so risk appetite's an interesting thing. Yeah. If we want to make sure that nothing happens to us, the best thing that you could do is probably stay at home inside a room with mattresses on all ends, etc. That's not how you live a life. The life is not about it's not about eliminating all risks. So that I think is not what this is about. The question is, do you want to live in a society where a government, your government, will indiscriminately survey people who are not necessarily inside their crosshairs? And do you want to live in a society where the consequences of that are there? So I know many people who are becoming more and more afraid. Listen.
Yes. Thank you.
Either you're going to have to leave or you have to be silent, because it's really, really difficult to speak from here. I realize you don't know that, maybe, but I understand I have the microphone. I was invited to be here with the microphone.
The idea is that people come here to listen and talk outside. That's the way it is.
Thank you. So the question is, do we want to live in a world where people are starting to inhibit themselves because they're not sure whether the government is paying attention to them or not? And we will never be sure whether they are not. So I know many people who are already sort of afraid to click on certain things, to look certain things up, because they're not sure whether their behavior will somewhere trigger an event that will make them look at it. And this law doesn't give you the assurance that won't be the case.
Clear. Are there any questions? Over here. I'll throw you. You throw it. Yes.
So this
The question,
topic is...
the question is for?
It's in general.
Okay.
So, this topic, I was here last time we discussed this, and my thoughts on this at this point is, how much leverage do we even have left at this point? Everything has been corrupted and molested by every organization, whether it be our banks, all of the institutions that we're supposed to trust in every facet of culture, whether it be in the media or anything. And at this point in my life, I've self-censored massive amounts because my particular line of work, I use a lot of words and emails that catch me on lists. And I deal with government organizations and other entities around the world that catch all of my communications. So at this point, looking at the way that the world is structured and what has gone on in this whole crypto world, the only way that I see forward at this point is to encrypt everything and trust nobody and trust nothing. There's no way that we're ever going to come to consensus that's going to be reasonable or trustworthy, because trust has been violated in every single facet of society.
Okay, interesting. And what is your question?
How can we even change it? How do we have any idea that we can even fight back against this? Because it is long sailed at this point. The data volumes that are retained at this point in data centers all over the world.
I understand. This is what they call a fight lagging behind with reality.
Well, I would like to give a personal response, maybe, because I can see a struggle, and maybe personally I'm a bit old-fashioned, or some people might call it naive, but I don't know. I think the only thing we can do is power to the people, and the reason why Amnesty supported this initiative for the referendum was we saw that there might be a gain in having some public debate about it. What hasn't been there, during the years that the law was debated in Parliament. And along this public debate, evening after evening, are organized now to talk about this law. And there's also a lot we don't discuss with each other, and there are a lot of nuance and stuff like that, but I think, well, yeah, maybe it's a bit naive, but I think there's a lot of gain in talking about this. And yeah, in the end, hopefully, more power to the people and for some change, but maybe that's why I work for an organization like Amnesty.
That's where a referendum for is, to make people think about decisions, doesn't? Yeah.
Can I follow up?
Teun, of course, yes.
I totally agree with you that it's good that we're finally having a debate about counterterrorism, and I also agree with you that will be the way to go about avoiding the kind of dystopia that you just outlined. I would even have wanted this debate to be a lot broader, because there's a lot of other counterterrorism laws that do not get the same level of attention that the Sleepwet does. And but to make it even broader, what about all the bombing and the military intervention that we do, and how does that feed the terrorist threat? So I personally would hope that the campaign in this for this referendum is the starting point for a much broader debate about where we want to draw the line, like what are we willing to accept in the fight against terrorism.
But will the debate go about terrorism or about privacy? What do you think?
Well, it has been about privacy a lot, but I think that the idea is that somehow you have to weigh that against any potential gains that have to do with counterterrorism. And one of the points that I tried to make is that there are perhaps some gains, but how do you weigh that against the potential damage that law could do?
Well, the debate should be about security with human rights.
Yeah. Okay. But like the question asker said, well, there's no trust, and well, one of the aims of terrorism is to destroy all trust between people, I think, to make people afraid, to make people not feel safe. Anybody could be a killer. That's the idea of terrorism.
That's a little bit my argument always, is that currently our fear of terrorism is already creating victims. I really would dread this. Let me say it in a different way. I have a lot of pity for people who have an Arabic looks walking around the Netherlands or in the public transportation, etc., because you are constantly being looked at as if you are a potential threat. Yeah? If your backpack is a little bit too big, if you're sweating a little bit too much, if you speak a language that the people don't understand, you're seen as a threat. And so basically we are eroding the trust in our society in a particular way. I think that I have friends who are scared to travel by the train past Schiphol, our airport, because they're literally, and these are sort of sensible people still, I would say, but they get a little bit nervous when they're in large crowds, because they've seen the news magnifies these things a lot, they magnify these chances a lot, and it means that we don't trust each other anymore, and you need trust in a society for society to work. You can't, well, it's ironic to speak about this at a Bitcoin conference, but I do think you need trust to treat each other decently. Yeah.
Okay, clear. Any other question? Two. Where is it? You can throw it over there. Yes, would be very nice. Thank you. Yes, speak close to the microphone, please.
So we have to phrase questions, right?
Yes.
All right, so to put it succinctly, when North Korea or someone else launches a supercavitating torpedo and blows up an aircraft carrier, then the NATO agreement, I believe, does oblige us to assist our allies in times of war. And if a judge heeds this call, considers it legal, and the Hague government also decides that indeed NATO has to act upon allies being attacked, and people try not to end the modern world, Is that terrorism? Or is this just another useful thing that the dragnet is also useful against?
My personal perception of terrorism is that it's a form of political violence that is typically, well, by the definition that I used, committed by non-state actors. I don't use the label terrorism as
right. So if the Dutch government calls me personally, because I'm liable for this, to come and fight in Korea, and I refuse.
Yes.
Do I, or all the people that side with me refuse, have any chance in hell?
Now, what I raised is an interesting question: is terrorism defined by law? So, or could it change if, for instance,
well,
we now have...
There's a lot of legal definitions about terrorism, and they change all the time.
No, well, I mean, for instance, we now have a president in the United States who is redefining the idea of treason. You know, if you don't applaud, right. People always should applaud, I think, but if you don't applaud, then you're a traitor. So, could it be possible, would it be possible that if there's a new government that says, well, if you don't want to do...
Not a new government. Actually, not the government at all. Just the judges say that we must indeed oblige to NATO contracts.
You don't want to do service? You don't want to go to war?
I think Dutch counterterrorism law does contain some. I mean, you have to commit an act of violence, for instance. It does contain some safeguards in that respect, but you're absolutely right in saying that it's being used as a label by governments to discredit opposition. But that's the reason that what it was, and that's what I was trying to explain.
It is already the case that any kind of political dissent is called terrorism, as opportune. But the question was more about why are we talking about the blowback from a decade-long rape in the Middle East, as if it is something that can oppose our basic human dignities and democratic norms and values.
I think that's another subject. Then we're talking about the law, and these people are experts on the law.
It keeps getting talked to in context of terrorism, even though terrorism is not a very serious issue when compared to our basic human dignity.
Yes, right. Yeah, no, sure. No, okay. That's a fair point. But like, we're not, as a society, rational in the way we weigh risks. Like terrorism pushes all our buttons. We're more afraid of things that are easily that are easy to visualize, that are unpredictable, and that we have no control over. That's the reason why we get in cars, because we're the ones who are driving. So even though the risks there are a lot bigger, we're much less afraid when we're driving a car, even though we're exposing ourselves to a much bigger risk than a terrorist.
So I'm actually very afraid, because when I was at the airport last time, I got guns pointed at me, point blank. I had American style, you know, like put your hands in the air where I can see them, and then the whole, oh God, you're actually, you know, totally Dutch and not a terrorist. No, sorry. Worst thing is, you can't step in front of your girlfriend because she'll break line of sight. And that's a security issue. That's what I'm talking about when I say human dignity.
Well, I mean, there's many ways to fight terrorism.
Please stop it with the terrorism, because this is a dragnet law to analyze all of our behaviors on our digital devices. Our digital devices soon will absolve all data that could be absolved because, well, that's sort of features, you know, it's cool.
Yeah, but I think those are kind of issues that have been addressed by previous speakers.
Everything that happens, you start getting into an issue that is no longer just, I don't have privacy. It's, I don't have the ability to think because my environment adapts to my thoughts before I know I have them. I am controlled entirely in the streams of my information because everything about me is known.
That's clear. Do you have another question, or do you want to finish with a question? Or you just want to make a statement? Because you did.
I'm just really pissed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there any other question?
The question is, could we please stop talking about terrorism and start talking about the issues of AI and data analysis, the value of that to our national security is not like, terrorism is not the biggest aspect of our national security image when we're talking about surveillance. The biggest issue is our government going awry and nobody being able to do anything about it. The second biggest issue would be a total loss of individual capacity for thought. So why are you guys talking about terrorism this much? You're just enabling this false narrative of blowback. You know, blowback being...
So, thank you for speaking up.
I guess
Sorry.
it happens a lot. I moderate a lot, and it happens a lot that the organization picks the wrong subject. I'm sorry it happened tonight, but we're talking about terrorism.
It's really not your fault.
And the referendum law, so that's what we stick to tonight. I'm sorry. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I have just a short question. So we know from the Snowden privacy stuff, mass surveillance is a thing. We also know that the Netherlands is part of the 14 IS countries in order to share data. I use a VPN connection all the time. Should I choose the Netherlands as an exit point to go into the internet?
That's an interesting question. You mean after this law or right now?
Both.
Okay. Is the Netherlands a good point to access the internet, or should you go somewhere else?
I don't think the VPN really affects that. It doesn't necessarily protect you against mass surveillance. It's usually a smart way to escape censorship if the VPN allows you to leave your country. So if you're in a country where you can't access certain information because it's blocked inside your country, you can use a VPN for that. But in general, your VPN connection will escape somewhere. And then if your connection between your client and your server is not an encrypted connection, then it means that the data can be seen. And even if it's encrypted, a lot of the metadata about it can be seen as well. So if you want to be sure, you better, or if you want to be surer, I should say, you better use Tor for that.
Okay. Anybody else on this subject? No. Any other question? No? Not at all? Is the referendum going to change anything about the law?
Yes.
Yes?
Optimist.
What way?
Well, I'm hoping that the government will come to its senses and start taking the critique that has come from everywhere in society, so basically from the Data Protection Office, from the Raad van State, from lots of NGOs, from half of the political spectrum, and so I hope that they will take the critique on board and sort of redesign the law according to the 5 fixes that we've suggested.
Okay, and is there any way as a public to protect yourself against the law? If the law comes, is there any way to protect yourself or the public in general? Would there be some way to say, okay, we go do things differently so the law won't work?
Yeah, well, encryption will help a little bit.
So the effect of the law might be that encryption becomes more popular.
It will certainly have that effect. I'm quite convinced of that.
Okay.
I mean, since Snowden, we've seen that effect already. It's a real effect.
Okay. And last question, because we're running out of time. Could you predict the outcome of the referendum?
The outcome?
Yeah.
There will be a massive uprising against this law with unseen, unheard of results of a giant no.
A giant no. A giant
unifying our country in a no.
You know that it's a local elections. You know how many people go and vote with local elections?
About 40%.
Yeah. Teun, what do you think? It's going to be no?
I think it's going to be close. I'm going to go with 52% no, 48% yes.
That's the usual democratic outcome, yes.
Well, I'm with Hans.
You're
clear.
A massive no. It's going to be a massive no. Lotte?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're all going to vote no, right? So.
Is anybody voting yes here? We have one there.
Brave man.
Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for your attention. We now have a, yeah.